Good evening, and welcome to Ballot Meridian, Ingham County Prosecutor Debate. It's live on HOMTV. Well, we've got two here this evening, one starting right now, the Ingham County Prosecutor Debate, and then we've got an 8 p.m. debate that goes from 8 to 10 o'clock, so 2 hours with the Meridian Township trustees. So watch this and stay tuned for that one. It's October 25th, and I am Eric Sherman. Tonight we want you to participate in this live debate, so please call in with your questions to 517-349-1232, or as always you can tweet or Facebook your questions. Contact us at HOMTV using the hashtag #BallotMeridian. For the next hour, you have the opportunity to ask any question you want of the candidates. We have with us this evening the Republican candidate, Billie Jo O'Barry, and we have Democratic candidate Carol Siemon. So the phone lines are now open. Call in with your questions again, 517-349-1232. Tweet, Facebook, using our handle at HOMTV, hashtag #BallotMeridian. If you want to ask a question of the candidates, though, you must phrase them in such a way that both candidates can answer. You cannot ask a question directed at a specific candidate. I want to thank the candidates for joining us this evening, and we will let them introduce themselves with a brief word, and we're going to start alphabetically by the last name. So Ms. O'Barry, we'll start with you.
Thank you very much. Good evening. My name is Billie Jo O'Barry, and I am seeking an opportunity to serve as your next Ingham County prosecutor. I have had almost three decades of experience at prosecuting cases for the city of Lansing. I've done thousands of cases. There is a real need right now for an experienced person who is familiar with all of the cases that will come before the courts here in Ingham County. I have that experience. I have served as a liaison with the courts throughout the county over the years, and my experience will be used to ensure that we protect victims' rights, that there is transparency in the prosecutor's office, which is sadly lacking, which we've seen now as a result of the evidence that has had to be called into question in our cases. And also, I want to work towards justice through a public defender's office for everyone, regardless of sex, gender, race, or sexual orientation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now Ms. Carol Siemon.
Thank you, Eric. I'm Carol Siemon, the Democratic candidate for prosecutor. This campaign is a continuation of my career working for criminal justice reform and progressive changes, working for social justice and advocating for crime victims, including survivors of sexual abuse and domestic violence. I believe that our laws and their enforcement should reflect the great promise of our country. Let's say no to mass incarceration of young adults and persons of color. Let's stand together and vote Democratic. Thank you.
Thank you. The format for this debate is going to be that the candidates get 2 minutes to answer each question. After each candidate has answered their question, or I've had to cut them off at 2 minutes, then we will offer a 30-second rebuttal to anyone who desires. You do not have to take it. And then we will alternate through the questions back and forth until we run out of time. And we might already have that problem because we've got a call on the line, so keep them coming. But right now we have Carrie from Stockbridge to ask a question. Go ahead, Carrie.
Hi. I was wondering if either of you have family or relatives that work in the Ingham County court system that would possibly create a conflict of interest if you were elected.
Okay, thank you, Carrie, for that question. And we will start with Ms. O'Barry for the first question.
No, I do not have any family members that are currently working in the court system or the prosecutor's office that would create any conflict of interest.
Thank you. While I don't believe it would be a conflict of interest, my husband is chief referee of the Ingham County Family Division of Juvenile Court, and if I am elected, he would be retiring. He's turning 65 soon, and this was a discussion we've been having for some time. So there would be no conflict, although if we were both serving, I believe that we'd be able to work that out.
Okay. And this is, now that you've answered your question, this would be the time that I would ask if you have any additional comments or a rebuttal, but doesn't look like either of you do.
Well,
please.
I have no conflict, and I think that we have to avoid the appearance of any improprieties. So while I respect my opponent's statement that she believes that this would present no conflict, there could possibly be the appearance of an impropriety if the prosecutor and her spouse is working as the referee in the probate court.
Ms. Siemon, you have an answer to that?
I do feel that's appropriate to address. First of all, as I've indicated, his plans are to retire if I'm elected. But second of all, in this day and age where both men and women are working serious professional jobs, I think that we run into this issue, and as professionals and with the intervention of State Court Administrative Office or whatever would be appropriate, you work it out.
Okay, thank you very much. We will now go to my standard list of questions while we wait for more calls or tweets and any Facebook questions. And my first question is, explain your educational and professional background and how they make an ideal candidate for prosecutor of the county. And we begin with Ms. Siemon for this one.
Thank you, Eric. I, as a student at Michigan State University, attended James Madison College, where I studied the foundations of our government, political philosophy, read most of the political philosophy of the last couple centuries, and really fostered an interest in policy and understanding how our government best serves people. I had already decided I was likely planning to go to law school, and I had a deep interest in social justice and civil rights issues, and that opportunity in college allowed me to pursue that as well. I moved to Boston, where I attended Suffolk University Law School on Beacon Hill and studied civil rights, environmental law, women's issues, in addition to, of course, the core curriculum of law school. I came back to the Lansing area where I'd lived my entire life other than those 3 years. And my first job as an attorney was working for Judge James Giddings as a circuit court law clerk, where I was exposed to a wide variety of issues. Began working with him on some issues involving working with children with incarcerated mothers and other social justice issues. Worked with the Council Against Domestic Assault as a volunteer back in the 80s. And then as I moved in through my career as a prosecutor and the other aspects of my career have continued to those focuses on crime victims, social justice, child welfare, and other related issues.
Ms. O'Berry, same question to you.
Thank you. My route to law school was quite a bit different. I started going to Lansing Community College out of high school. My plan was to be a certified public accountant. I was married and had a child, and I began working at the Ingham County Prosecutor's Office in 1975. My first job there was entry level, but I worked with the director to establish the first pretrial diversion program in Ingham County, which I'm proud to say is the forerunner of a lot of the treatment courts today. It's a diversionary course for individuals who've been charged with crimes. In addition, while I was working there, as I said, I wanted to be an accountant, but I developed a real interest in the law and a real respect for those attorneys I worked with, like Raymond Scadeller and later Peter Houck and Frank DeLuca and R. David Wilson. And I decided at that time I wanted to go into law, so I became changed and went into a paralegal program at Lansing Community College. Thereafter, I later went to Justin Morrill College at MSU and later Western Michigan University Thomas M. Cooley Law School, where I achieved my Juris Doctorate degree in 1984.
Thank you. How long do you think that evidence should be kept before it is properly disposed of? And for this one, we start with you, Ms. O'Berry.
Thank you. Your evidence has to be kept on file until there is a final disposition in the criminal case. We are contacted as prosecutors regularly by the police department to get information whether or not we need evidence to be continued being held. It is of the utmost importance that that evidence is preserved and protected. And I am very upset with the recent revelation that we have evidence in this county that the integrity has been compromised by the storage of that evidence. As soon as we knew in Ingham County the prosecutor's office had to dismiss a case, there should have been an audit at that time. All cases pending with evidence that was required for prosecuting that case should have been examined. The chain of custody should have been reviewed, and then so that reasonable decisions could have been made with respect to continuing prosecution in those cases. As it was, nothing was done. The fingers are being pointed at one another. The prosecutor's office points at the sheriff's office and says, well, they didn't tell us about the problem. The sheriff's department says, well, we didn't think it would be a significant problem. Again, this is a lack of integrity, and it hurts all of us, because how are people supposed to have confidence in the judicial system when at the very core of prosecution is the contamination of evidence? And this would not be tolerated on my shift. I'm contacted regularly by individuals, by the police department, seeking information about whether or not they can destroy evidence, dispose of it. If it is through the city of Lansing, then I will check the status of the case to see if there's a final disposition. If it is through Ingham County, I refer them immediately to the Ingham County Prosecutor's Office for that information to be provided to the police department.
Thank you. Ms. Siemon, same question.
Thank you. Well, while I agree you keep the evidence to the final disposition of the case, there are times when there may be reason to keep it beyond that. So, for example, many of you have heard about the nationwide issue involving rape kits, sexual assault kits, and the fact that many of them languished untested or disposed of or unused for many years. As there's been now a re-examination of those kits, we're finding unknown cases that have been able to be issued involving multiple victims and multiple serial rapists. So there are reasons to consider keeping evidence of a significant period of time. An underlying issue, I think, behind this question also is the recent disclosure of the loss of quite a bit of evidence at the Ingham County Sheriff's Department. We don't know how much yet, and as soon as the prosecutor's office learned about it, from my understanding, they sought to have an investigation by the Michigan State Police, which is an appropriate outside investigation of this very serious issue. This is a very significant issue that will involve looking at what has happened with many cases. I disagree with Ms. O'Berry that the fact that one case had an evidence problem and automatically means we had to look at all cases. It is a situation where evidence does occasionally get lost or misplaced, and you have to then look at whether the case can still be followed through. You have to disclose to the defense attorney the situation, and you must take appropriate action, including dismissal of cases where required.
Would you like 30 seconds additional?
Yes. Today, I was doing pretrials with a defense attorney, and one of the first questions, and this was a veteran defense attorney, the question that he asked me was, what do you think about the fact that evidence was contaminated at the Sheriff's Department? I said, this cannot be tolerated. It is now calling into question the prosecution of many, many cases here in Ingham County. We didn't need MSP to come in, Michigan State Police, or a retired prosecutor to come and do an audit. This should have been done by the prosecutor's office. Sorry, I'm going to have to cut you off there.
Ms. Siemon, would you like an additional 30 seconds?
Very briefly, the Ingham County Board of Commissioners, at the request of interim prosecutor Gretchen Whitmer, authorized allocation of money to hire somebody to specifically look at the cases. I am confident that that is being done and that we will be working on these issues for integrity. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. We now have a call from Scott from Okemos. Go ahead with your question, Scott.
Hi, this is Scott from Okemos, and my question is, where do you currently work?
For that, and Ms. Siemon, you start with that question.
Thank you. I most recently was working at Public Policy Associates. I'm not currently employed. What I've been doing, I've had the pleasure and the luxury in the last few years of being able to study, work on different issues. I've been able to step back and decide what I wanted to do with my career and my life. I've been studying neuropsychology and working on issues of trauma, and really learned that the pieces of my career fit together beautifully, so that at this point in time, this is the direction I want to go. Thank you.
Ms. O'Berry, same question.
I work for the Lansing City Attorney's Office, where I've worked for 29.5 years. Right now we have a skeletal staff, and I am one of the anchor people there in the City Attorney's Office because of my years of experience. I'm a veteran at handling the prosecution of cases, which includes thousands of cases for the City of Lansing. I have supervised staff there at the City of Lansing, externs, support staff, new attorneys coming in the office, which will be occurring very shortly. We have some jobs posted right now for support staff as well as attorneys to come into our office. I'm looking forward to training them in the prosecution of cases. And this is something I've been doing for 30 years. This is not the time to have someone return from basically retirement. While I respect my opponent, she left the prosecutor's office in 1995. That was 21 years ago. I was in a meeting today, a police agency meeting, and we were talking about recent technology where we have electronically convey complaints, where we have e-tickets, where we have body cams, where we have motor vehicle recording instruments. And one of the questions was, has any of us done a case yet where the video from a body cam was used? Yes, I have. I believe I have had the first case in the City of Lansing where we had to use the video. This is important because you need to know what types of equipment are compatible with one another. I've had this experience because I've been doing this. I can walk into the Ingham County Prosecutor's Office, be a leader for this community. I know what to look for. I know how to identify problems. I know how to work on resolutions of those problems so that we can get the Ingham County Prosecutor's Office back in a position of trust and confidence in this community.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Siemon, would you like an additional 30 seconds?
Thank you. I've been an attorney for 35 years. I've worked in a wide variety of areas. I've prosecuted thousands of cases, including many felonies, which Ms. O'Berry does not have experience with. But I've also worked on all three branches of state government. I've supervised up to 37 staff. I've administered budgets. I've done policy. I've seen at the national and state level what works and what doesn't work. I've kept up with all aspects of the legal system as well as many other related.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to cut you off. Ms. O'Berry, do you want 30 seconds?
Yes, please. I've handled numerous cases at the circuit court level, the complex civil litigation. I have handled thousands of cases in the courts here in Ingham County, prosecuting cases. I also have taught trial skills workshop, both criminal, which includes felony cases, as well as misdemeanor cases. The rules of evidence are the same, and I have taught those kinds of cases. I have extensive experience, and I could walk into the prosecutor's office.
You mentioned body cameras, and so I want to ask the question of how recent headlines have affected the way police officers are tried in recent cases. And for this one, we start with Ms. O'Berry.
Yes, I've actually spoken with police officers about body cams, and we find it very beneficial because while the public may think that there is a hesitancy for officers to have body cameras because it will show exactly what happened in instances, we have found and appreciate the recording of incidents. And I have oftentimes been able to take the video from the motor vehicle recording instrument and now the body cams and show that to defendants as well as their defense counsel to show them exactly what happened at the time. Because as they say, there's always three sides to the story. There's the defendant's version, there's the officer's version, and then there's what really happened. Those body cams help protect the officers also. It also makes sure that all the constitutional rights of everyone that come in contact with law enforcement are protected because they're being videotaped. So I have absolutely no problem with the body cams, and like I said, the police officers are very appreciative of the recording of those interactions that they have with citizens out there on the roadways. Also, I believe that this will help reduce the number of frivolous lawsuits that are brought against police officers because we now will have video of the actual incidents as they occurred.
Thank you. Ms. Siemon, same question. How have recent headlines affected the way police officers are being tried?
When you say tried, I guess I'm not, I guess I can respond. I think that body cameras are a good thing. I certainly in Lansing, our mayor, Virgil Bernero, supported body cameras for Lansing Police very early. East Lansing, I was at a public forum of Community Relations East Lansing Police last week. They've been piloting body cameras. They're going to go to a different vendor. I think most the good police agencies who are really trying to work on these issues appreciate the opportunity to record, learn from the videotaping, what they can do to improve, how they respond to its situations. It does protect, of course, the rights of the defendants, of witnesses and victims, and of the police officer, his or herself. It provides a wonderful training tool, and I think that it's one of the steps that we need to take to avoid some of the situations we've seen across the nation where there have been responses that we all can agree are inappropriate.
Okay. Any response? Need more time? 30 seconds?
No, in fact, I believe that the video cameras are, again, very, very helpful. And there's a misconception that the police officers are not there to serve the best interests of the community. And these body cams are very, very helpful in dispelling that myth. And that's one of the things that I have officers contact me from the roadway, and they will talk to me as the situation is unfolding to get advice over the phone so that they don't make mistakes.
Okay. Ms. Siemon, do you have 30 seconds?
No, thank you.
Okay. The next question, we start with you, Ms. Siemon, and that is, how do you, what's your position on gun control legislation?
I support federal and state gun control legislation. Obviously, as a prosecutor, my role would be more limited. I'm not wouldn't be a legislator. I do believe that in the role of prosecutor that we enforce the laws that we have, that we need to get the guns out of the hands of people who are illegally carrying them and young people who should not be carrying them. We need to have increased gun safety. We need to have the CDC doing research on guns, which they've not been able to do. They've been hamstrung from doing that. We need to learn the full extent of the gun issue in our nation. I support bans on assault weapons, and frankly, I do, while within the constraints of the Constitution, supporting gun control. Thank you.
Ms. O'Berry, same question.
Thank you. I will, as a prosecutor, follow the federal and state laws, of course. And I believe that we need an awareness. I believe that we have to have young people, especially, have courses through the school. Also, we have individuals that are getting gun permits, and they need to have educational classes, so that when an individual, even if they're licensed and they have a handgun, that they have to take classes so that they know the appropriate way to lock their gun, their weapon, their firearm, keep it in a safe or whatever. I know for a few years back, the Lansing Police Department was giving out free locks for firearms, which was a wonderful idea. The problem is that with just registration of firearms, that's not going to resolve the problem. I recently had a case just this past week where a handgun was found in a home, and there was a young child that was in that home, although the child was an infant at the time, but there was a handgun there. When they ran the registration of the handgun, it turned out that it wasn't registered. It was a registered handgun, but not registered to that individual. It had been stolen. It was a stolen handgun. So we have to enforce the laws that we have on the books because this individual had a stolen handgun. Thank you.
Ms. Siemon, additional thoughts?
I just wanted to state, too, that we didn't mention background checks, and obviously that's a hot issue. We need extensive background checks. We do need to make sure that people who have a mental health history that is related to a current situation. We need people who have a history of domestic violence and other transgressions. They're not allowed to have access to guns, and we need to get illegal guns out of the hands of people who have them as well.
Ms. O'Berry, more time?
That's correct. When we have someone who has been convicted of a serious criminal offense involving firearms or assaultive behavior, yes, that would be a criteria where they should not be allowed to have a firearm. I would agree with that.
Okay, thank you. Want to let you know that we're just over halfway point of this program, the Ingham County Prosecutor debate that we are hosting live. And I want to remind you that at the top of the hour, 8 o'clock, we have the Meridian Township Board of Trustee debate coming to you at 8 p.m. live until 10 p.m. So keep calling in for this debate, 349-1232, or use Twitter or Facebook to tweet or Facebook your questions at the handle @HOMTV, Ballot Meridian as the hashtag. And speaking of tweets, we have Zachary Barrett, who has a tweet for us, and that reads, "What are either candidate's positions on how best to handle at-risk youth?" Either candidate's positions on how to handle at-risk youth. And Ms. O'Berry, we start with you.
Thank you. I recently met with the director of a program here in Ingham County that is currently working with the Ingham County Prosecutor's Office, and it is the Teen Court. It's an intervention program for individuals who may be involved in the legal system through offenses such as truancy and those types of cases. What it attempts to do is to involve the young person along with their family, and to try to stem that pattern of behavior that oftentimes leads into adult criminal activity. I would be a strong proponent of continuing that program. They recently had their grant renewed, and it's a wonderful program, and I would be an advocate of that. I also believe that there needs to be communication in the schools through the law enforcement community. Since I've been with the city attorney's office, when they did the DARE program, I participated in the DARE program, going into the schools and talking to the young people. Young people have to be made aware of the dangers. For example, in drugs, oftentimes young people get involved in drug activity through prescription drugs that are there in the home, or perhaps they've had an injury, a sports injury, where they've taken pain medication and they have abused it, misused it. So we have to work on programs, work with the agencies that are out there that we can make referrals to individuals, to the courts for recovery for addicts and things like that. And just working with the young people, I recently went to the Ingham Academy and heard some wonderful stories from young people about activities that they had been involved in, but through the Ingham Academy, they had changed their course of conduct and were now on the road to being productive adults, and I would support that as well.
Thank you. Ms. Siemon, same question. What Zachary asks, how do we best handle at-risk youth?
Thank you. My last 4 years at the Ingham County Prosecutor's Office, I was chief of the juvenile division dealing with juvenile delinquency and child abuse and neglect, and I've worked in that area for the intervening years as well. We have some great programs here in Ingham County that address the needs once the kids have come within the court's jurisdiction. So whether it's the intensive neglect services program that works with children who will remain in the home instead of going into foster care, whether it's the teen court or truancy court or some of the other wonderful programs that work with kids who've come in under the delinquency part of the court. Those are excellent, but they don't go far enough. What we need, I believe, and I am running on a social justice platform, which I think is rather unusual for a prosecutor, but I think it's the 21st century response to crime and criminal justice. I believe that we have as a community want to see an educational system that really addresses issues. We need to address issues in our community of poverty and homelessness and food deprivation. All the underlying issues that place children at risk, their parents who are incarcerated, parents with substance abuse issue, mental health issues. These issues all require a strong community net of services, of intervention, of community involvement, so that we avoid entry into the criminal justice system and we help at-risk youth be able to avoid entering the system at all.
Ms. O'Berry, would you like a rebuttal?
Yes, please. As Ingham County Prosecutor, it's nice to talk about being involved in areas such as poverty and working with the families out in the community. But someone has to lead the Ingham County Prosecutor's Office. Someone has to be the prosecutor. We have agencies like the Department of Human Services that will network with the families. Myself as the Ingham County Prosecutor will make referrals to those agencies, recommend to the courts.
Thank you very much. Ms. Siemon, would you like a rebuttal?
Very briefly. As a leader, I believe that means leading the whole community. And I mean a whole community in the sense of a healthy whole community. So I see that as a situation where it is not at all inconsistent. It's part of the evolving role of the prosecutor in the 21st century. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have now a call from Paul. Paul from Hazlitt, go ahead with your question.
My question is, with respect to the recently compromised evidence at the sheriff's office, is that a prosecutable offense? And what are their respective positions on that?
Okay, thank you very much, Paul, for that question. And for this one, we start with Ms. Siemon.
Well, it's going to require an investigation. There could be. We don't know at that point, and that is one reason I believe it's very important that it's the Michigan State Police, not the Ingham County Sheriff's Department or a local agency that does the investigation, that we're going to, if the prosecution were to occur, it would likely involve an agency outside of the Ingham County Prosecutor's Office, again, because of that historic, that's typically what's done in these situations. Right now, I only know what's in the news media myself, so we are not in a position, I don't believe, other than have a speculation that's not based on evidence at this point, which I think is very dangerous. We don't know what's going on, but indeed, if there is something that needs to happen, we need to be transparent, we need to be open, we need to continue to look at it, we need to look at all avenues, and if there needs to be a prosecution at some point in time, we need to be fully supportive of that. Thank you.
Ms. O'Berry, same question.
Thank you. We definitely need to look at what has occurred there at the Ingham County Sheriff's Department, and it may very well end up being situation where criminal charges could be brought. As I said earlier this evening, the preservation of evidence is of paramount importance. It underlies our criminal justice system, is being able to know that the evidence is protected, that chain of evidence. And if someone has intentionally violated the procedures and the rules, that must be addressed. And if it's gone even further than that, where evidence has not just been misplaced or not just improperly been destroyed, but actually intentionally removed, then it is prosecutable and must be prosecuted to restore the integrity to the system so that the community has faith in not only the prosecutor's office, but the sheriff's department as well.
Ms. Siemon, anything additional?
But thank you, Eric.
Okay. Ms. O'Berry? Okay. How has the decriminalization of medical marijuana affected the drug-related cases in the court system? We start with Ms. O'Berry for this one.
Well, it's fairly recent now that we have medical marijuana. And that has, because the legislation wasn't clear, there were a lot of issues that were not addressed. It's been very, very confusing for individuals. For example, a lot of individuals don't realize that even if they can use medical marijuana, they cannot drive a vehicle under the influence. So we have cases where individuals are coming in, being involved in accidents, and when their blood is being tested, we find out they're not under the influence of alcohol, they're under the influence of some type of drugs, and so quite often it's THC that's in their system. So this has been a very confusing time for individuals. Recently, East Lansing, of course, passed legislation that allows individuals above the age of 21 to have less than an ounce of marijuana in their possession. However, at the federal level, it's still illegal. It's a controlled substance. So again, we have a lot of confusion. But as prosecutor, I will follow the laws of the state of Michigan. Whatever the legislation is that is passed, then I will follow that. Individuals that have used medical marijuana and have the appropriate certification for using medical marijuana, that would be the case that that is permissible, but they have to do that within the ramifications of the legislation. For example, they have to have the marijuana, it's a limited amount, so many plants per caregiver, and then that caregiver can have so many patients, but it must be kept in a locked facility. So if we have those kinds of situations where they're not following the law, then they are prosecutable, and I will prosecute those cases.
Ms. Siemon, same question.
Thank you. So marijuana is a complicated issue because, as Ms. O'Berry alluded to, there's federal law regarding possession of marijuana. It's a scheduled drug, so it still falls as a violation of federal law, no matter what the state of Michigan and the voters of the state of Michigan said when they legalized, as other states have done, medical marijuana. We also have the confusion that she's alluded to, and that's what happens with dispensaries, what happens with how medical marijuana fits within The other laws, such as driving under the influence, which obviously has to be enforced. It's a very serious crime. We also, how does it fit with the local city ordinances that may say possession of a certain amount, not of medical marijuana, but by a person over the age of 21 will not be something that we're going to pursue. We see it as not a violation of our local law. We have state law, we have local ordinances, we have federal law. It's an interplay between those. My perspective is we need to save our resources for going after the serious drugs like the heroin and opiates, that we do not need to be targeting addicts and people who are using small amounts. I'm supportive of medical marijuana, as our voters of the state of Michigan have supported it, and I believe that we, over the near future, legislation and the will of the voters of the United States and the state of Michigan will work out these details about the interplay between federal and state and local law.
Ms. O'Berry, rebuttal?
You know, if you're the homeowner and you have a residence next door that is growing marijuana and drying marijuana, we have a problem with the odors and fumes that are being emitted, and it can really be a nuisance. So again, we have to be very considerate of the other individuals in the areas, and this is why we do need regulations, and the city of Lansing is drafting an ordinance to provide guidelines.
Ms. Siemon?
I agree with what she just said.
Okay, great. We have another call. Keep the calls coming, but right now we've got Matt from Okemos. Go ahead with your question for the candidates.
I wanted to know, do the candidates support the creation of an Ingham County Public Defender's Office?
Okay, thank you, Matt, for that. Ms. Siemon, you first.
I support the efforts of the Michigan Indigent Defense Commission, and that is created to look at statewide the issues. So we have so many variations between jurisdictions and even within Ingham County, how each court pays for attorneys, how attorneys are appointed, what kinds of training and background they have to have, who they report to. I definitely support reforms in indigent defense. I don't take a position on what those reforms should be. I think the Michigan Indigent Defense Commission, and under our constitutional system, the Supreme Court is the branch of government that makes that final decision. So I support reform. I think we need a fairer system that pays defense attorneys and also protects the rights of the defendants, and exactly what form that is, I would not advocate for at this particular point in time.
Thank you. Ms. O'Berry, same question.
Yes, I have very definite ideas about a public defender's office. And this comes from my experience of over 30 years at working with court-appointed attorneys in the prosecution of cases. We need a system that enables the defense bar to have the adequate resources to be able to compete, basically, with the prosecutor's office. Now, this may sound strange for a prosecutor candidate to say that we should have comparable resources between the prosecution and the defense. But first and foremost, I'm an officer of the courts, and I want everyone's constitutional rights to be protected, because if any one person's rights are affected or denied, then at some point any one of us could have our constitutional rights deprived. So, going back to Public Defender's Office, all too often, I have seen indigent people come into the court, generally people of color, people of lower economic status. They don't have the means to hire an attorney of their own. So the court right now in Ingham County has a court-appointed list. The judge makes a decision on who's on the court-appointed list. Thereafter, if the court-appointed attorney wants to retain that contract, you have to keep in mind that the goal of the judge is to move the docket. So you don't want to file too many motions, you don't want to take too many cases to trial, and you're probably not going to get your contract renewed. Now, this may not be a popular thought, but it's a reality. So Public Defender's Office separates the attorney from that process, and this enables the defense attorney to act independently, have the resources, be paid comparable so that they can adequately represent the defendant in the most best possible way that they can.
Additional thoughts, Ms. Siemon?
Very briefly, I absolutely support indigent defense reform. It's clearly needed. It's a national issue. My concern is advocating for a particular system, especially in light of the expense of that and the uncertainty of the funding. It's my understanding that there is a request basically to the County Commission to consider this issue. It's an issue that would have to be financially feasible. Thank you.
Ms. O'Berry?
Yes, we recently passed a millage here in Ingham County in support of our animal shelter, Ingham County Animal Shelter. And while I am a huge advocate, I love pets of all kinds, are we saying that the rights of defendants, the money to be spent on that, it shouldn't be a paramount consideration for the Ingham County Board of Commissioners? Of course it should. Again, if any person's rights are denied, constitutional rights, then at some point any one of us could be affected. That's not too much to ask.
Thank you very much. If elected, what steps would you take to ensure fairness and equality is upheld in the judiciary process? And we start with Ms. O'Berry for this one.
The first thing is as Ingham County prosecutor, I would make sure that I established policies for my assistant prosecutors to follow. One is to use their discretion in a reasonable manner. What I mean by that is that I believe in the rule of law, that the laws are there to protect our society. They're not to control the behavior of individuals. The assistants need to be able to have guidelines, but they also need to look at the facts of each case individually, because every case that comes before the court has a different set of circumstances. So as you apply the facts to the law, I want my assistants to use their discretion to make the best possible decision, whether that be to issue or deny the charges, or even if the case is issued and down the road more evidence is secured, whether that means that the case should be dismissed or whether it means that the case be taken to trial. I will enable my assistant prosecutors to have a strong basis to make those decisions that will be in the best interest of the victims, first of all, and for the protection of society, yet get to the truth of the matter. I don't believe in prosecuting a case just to win the case. I believe in getting to the truth, getting to justice.
Thank you. Ms. Siemon?
Thank you. I agree with pretty much everything Ms. O'Berry has said in this regard. It is important for the prosecutor's office to have a moral compass, to have well-trained staff, exercising prosecutorial discretion appropriately, not overcharging, looking at each individual case, making decisions based on what new evidence may become available, working with the courts to make sure that they're maintaining the dockets so that each case comes up in a way that is protecting of the rights of the victims and the defendants and the witnesses, that we have well-trained prosecutors who are working within the legal system and the judicial process so that we do maintain the integrity of the case throughout the process while also looking out for all of the other interests of the community. Thank you.
Any additional thoughts?
I would agree with that, but sometimes we get so caught up in trying to move cases that we don't spend the time that's really needed to follow up with the victims. And that's paramount. Sometimes we want to just push a case through and we don't take the time to get input from the victim as to what are they looking for in the case. And sometimes I've had victims in cases tell me, I don't really want the person to go to jail. I just want them to acknowledge they were wrong.
Thank you. Ms. Siemon? Okay, we have people talking about rape culture in our society, and I'm curious what you think we should do to better combat the increasing number of sexual assault cases on college campuses. And we start with Ms. Siemon for this one.
Thank you. Well, we always, when you have data about sexual assault and when you have the media attention about sexual assault, I think you have to delve a little deeper. When I began at Michigan State University back in 1974, Michigan State had the highest reported rate of sexual assault in the nation. Didn't mean that they had the highest actual sexual assaults in the nation, but they actually were recording. They were reporting it, they were following through. We have a lot of problems. Maybe many of us have read the book Missoula, talking about a college culture and what happened in that state of Montana. We have numerous issues across the nation. I'm very serious about addressing sexual assault issues. It's a large part of what I've done in my career. We have some programs at Michigan State that are looking at how the sexual assault response is addressed on campus. We need to much more deeply, though, look at what is the culture, what makes people feel that it's okay to sexually assault people. We have the Stanford case, which obviously was heartbreaking, I think, for many of us to witness what the response was. We need to have an education of the respect and dignity of all members of our community, and then an appropriate, proportionate response, which includes incarceration of people who are systematically abusing people and taking advantage of them.
Ms. O'Barry, same question.
I think we have to start earlier with our young people, earlier than college age. We have to start at the elementary school age, impressing upon children that their bodies are there. No one is entitled to touch them without their permission. They have to grow up with that mindset, because all too often I've heard of young people, whether it be male or female, that have been assaulted, where they were in a situation where they felt like they were powerless. They didn't know what to do. They didn't know what to say. They didn't know how to get themselves out of the situation. If we start with very young children and teach them that their body belongs to them and that no one can touch them and that they should speak out, they should not, it's nothing to be ashamed of. If someone touches them inappropriately, I have a grandchild that's will be 10 years old very soon, and I impress upon her that there is nobody that is entitled to touch her without her permission, and that she should never keep that to herself and speak out and tell if someone has touched her in an inappropriate manner.
Any additional thoughts?
I really applaud the recent movement of young men calling young men on this issue. It's changing the men. It's changing males, and that's not said in a hateful way. It's just the truth. It's wonderful to be alert as to what your rights are and to not be touched inappropriately, but we need to change the culture of males that allows this to happen.
Ms. O'Barry, anything more?
Well, as I said earlier, this is for males and females, because people don't think about it, but there are males that are sexual assault victims as well. And very often they're more reluctant to speak out because they're ashamed of the situation, because they're male and they're supposed to be in control. So I think it's equal, male or female. They both should be taught that it's not okay for anyone to touch them inappropriately.
Thank you. If elected, you're obviously going to be the Ingham County prosecutor, but Meridian Township falling into that. I'm curious how you think the prosecutor's office could impact the quality of life specific to Meridian Township. And we start with Ms. O'Barry for that one.
Yes, thank you. The Ingham County Prosecutor's Office represents all of Ingham County. And I think sometimes we think about, since the Prosecutor's Office is located within the city of Lansing, that perhaps there's a focus on the city of Lansing. We are a region now. The suburbs have now become part of the urban areas. There are no areas that are isolated where they can't be touched by crime. In fact, we see more and more crime. I spoke at a Farm Bureau's annual dinner recently, and farmers on the south end of the county, they're victims of crime. Individuals come out, steal chemicals or equipment from them, either to use to make drugs or whatever. Same thing in Meridian Township. We have stores here in Meridian Township. We have banks here. We have homes here. So the prosecutor's office must represent all areas of this community, not just one specific area. And education, again, I want to have myself and assistant prosecutors go out and meet with various organizations on a regular basis, report to them hot spots in this county. For example, in Meridian Township, do we see a rise of burglaries in a certain neighborhood or a certain area? Do we see that there are home invasions that are in a certain area? The best key to deterring crime is to be aware, and we have to rely on each other. If we see something wrong, we need to speak out. So education, awareness is key in helping all of our townships, including Meridian Township.
Ms. Siemon?
Thank you. Well, I worked with the Meridian Township Police Department closely for over 11 years. I worked with David Hall before he was the police chief, and would be able to work very comfortably with the police department now. Also, each jurisdiction, whether it's a township, the city, or another organization within the sheriff's department, for example, they all have their particular jurisdiction. Some of them also have an attorney. So, for example, Meridian Township has a township attorney who takes on some of the functions of prosecution, similar to Ms. O'Berry working with the city attorney's office, taking on some prosecutorial functions with the city of Lansing. So what we have to do is mesh. How does that work? As I've gone door to door in Meridian Township, I've heard some issues and concerns expressed that may be a little bit different than they might be expressed in Lansing or in other parts of the county. So we'd have to be attentive to what those issues are, whether they involve retail fraud, whether they involve police coverage, whether they involve areas that a township attorney may handle at this point in time, and work together to address those issues for all of the members of Ingham County.
Additional thoughts?
I have worked with all areas here in Ingham County, different townships. I know the township attorneys and as well as the other city attorneys here in Ingham County. And we do need to have consistency. We need to have meetings and work together so that we, regardless of where a situation occurs, where if there's a criminal element or whatever, we must work together and be consistent in following the laws.
Ms. Siemon?
I don't have additional comment, thank you.
Okay. What is your view on how distracted drivers and drunk drivers and the laws upheld to enforce, how do you feel that those are being enforced? And we start with Ms. Siemon for that one.
Okay, so I feel very strongly about operating while impaired and operating under the influence of alcohol or drugs as serious offenses. When I first began prosecution in the 1980s, there was a relatively recent law. Before the 1983, it wasn't viewed as really a very serious offense comparatively, and it became a much more serious offense where over time we've realized the consequences of drunk driving. Not just the consequences in terms of the accidents and people who are killed, but also the role that alcohol and drugs play in overall problems in our communities. I believe that we need a strict response. I'm supportive of the sobriety courts and some of the other dispositional and diversionary processes. I think most people who are dealing with this kind of offense are going to be a one-time situation. When we have a person who has a chronic problem, we're going to need to have a different response than we do for somebody who is a one-time offender. We need to stabilize and standardize how we're going to respond to this so that if you're driving in East Lansing, Meridian Township, Delhi Township, or the Out County, Aurelius Township, we're going to have a similar response and similar resources available for dealing with the problem.
Ms. O'Berry?
Thank you. Well, since the time that Ms. Siemon was the prosecutor at Ingham County, the legislation has been passed that actually reduces the alcohol content level from 0.10 down to 0.08. And also we have legislation that has what we call the super drunk. Those individuals who have a blood alcohol content of 0.17 or greater can be prosecuted and receive up to 180 days in jail. For a first offense. A lot of people are not aware of that because this is newer legislation that has been passed. It is a very serious situation. Property is lost, and more importantly than that, lives are lost. So I have a very serious outlook towards drinking driving offenses, as well as distracted driving. We have heard in the papers, we have read about just tragic situations where individuals are texting and not paying attention to the road and cause just horrific accidents. It's a sad situation, but we have to prosecute those cases where that has been the reason for the accident. And I think that we need to have more requirements for those convicted of drunk driving. We standardize, we require that they go for Mothers Against Drunk Driving Victim Impact Weekend. We also require that they attend a National Highway Safety Program. Also, we require any individual convicted of drunk driving has to have an assessment done to see if they have an abuse problem or an addiction problem. But I think that we need even more education. And again, I think this needs to start at an earlier age. We all kind of trivialize MIPs, and could be the beginning.
Thank you. Ms. Siemon, additional thoughts?
Just very quickly, I agree that education is key, especially when we're talking about distracted driving. People need to realize the consequences, and those sometimes who are most responsible for the distracted driving are young people who really maybe don't fully realize the ramifications of what they do. So public education is key for that and for drunk driving as well.
Ms. O'Berry?
Nothing. Thank you.
Well, with that, we come close enough to the end of our program that we're going to close the phone lines and extend the opportunity to our candidates to give a closing statement. Alphabetically, we're started with Ms. O'Berry, and so Ms. Siemon, we start with you for closing statements. 30 seconds.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate you listening to our interviews, our debates, our discussions and community forums over the last few months. I look forward to the opportunity to serve you as the next Ingham County prosecutor. I pledge that even though this is a partisan race, that I will serve all of the people of Ingham County, and that I am especially concerned about victims' rights and defending the rights of defendants. Thank you.
Ms. O'Berry?
Thank you. Well, I think this evening that you've seen some differences between myself and my opponent. I am a practitioner who has been practicing for almost 3 decades now. Not only have I been a defense attorney, but I was also on the juvenile court-appointed list for Ingham County. I also clerked for Judge Kallman, assisting him with a backlog of court of claims cases, which now are handled by the Court of Appeals here in Michigan.
Thank you very much. Thank you for participating in our debate, and thank you for watching. This ends the Ingham County prosecutor debate with the candidates. And now we have another debate coming up in just a moment, a 2-hour debate in which we will welcome the Meridian Township Board of Trustees candidates, where Republican candidates Brian Zubak, Deborah Lee Piper, and So where we, Deborah Lee Piper and Jared S. Wilson, as far as Republican candidates, and now the Democratic candidates, which are Phil DeShane, Patricia Herring-Jackson, Dan Upsummer, and Kathy Ann Sunland. So that will be in just a moment at the beginning of the hour, 8 p.m., and I'll get their names all right then. As a reminder, you can always watch all of the programming and the debates online at HOMTV.net. I'm Eric Sherman. Thank you for watching.